I actually think that what this bill did was kill the idea of a carbon tax. I think it makes it completely unimportant and it'll never see the light of day. Why? I think it's because in the absence of what we did in the IRA, there wasn't a clear way of doing exactly what you said, which is letting people figure out what the equivalent trading price would be for burning a pound of coal versus, generating the energy needed to run something off of nuclear. There was no market clearing function for that. And the reason is because you couldn't get an equivalent amount of capacity effectively available online so that they could compete one for one. What we did through this IRA was essentially use money to create so many subsidies and then to also greenlight the way that incremental fossil fuel projects would come to market so that now they actually going to be put on a level playing field in the broad open market so that they can compete. When that happens, I think you will make those trade-offs better yourself. And as a result, I don't think that there will be a necessary offset mechanism that'll be required. Because this plan will still get us to about 40% of the way there where we want it to be by 2030, which is still a pretty decent leap forward. There is no plan that gets us to where we all need to be anyways. And I think that the appetite to go from this plan to where we need to be doesn't really exist. So I think that we're just going to have to kind of grit our teeth, get through the implementation of the IRA, and realize that this is the beginning of a probably 100+ year project. Nothing's going to get solved by 2050. Maybe you'll see something done by 2100. Probably not. It'll probably be a 2150, 2200 kind of an objective. And in that lens, I think like a whole bunch of business models got turned upside down. So I think carbon markets and carbon trading are not going to be the thing that we thought it was going to be. I think stuff like direct air capture, again, are going to be toy projects off to the side. I don't think that those are not going to be credible businesses like we thought they were going to be. Instead, the raw tonnage of dollars will do what America was able to do for solar and PV over 2000 to 2022, which is just crush the cost per watt into the pennies so that it can be equivalent to hydro, coal, and nuclear, and put everything on a level playing field and then allow the market to figure it out. How much do you think it would cost? I don't know, pick the most excruciatingly expensive third-party outsourcing firm you could, okay, to build an entire system to basically automatically review every single tax return and throw exceptions. And machine learn what fraud looked like or what misrepresentation. Let's say $5 billion. It'd be the most expensive. It'd be the most expensive piece of software ever written. And this is what was so kind of like, that was the only part of the bill that made less sense to me. I think like if you put really smart computers on the case or gave it to DeepMind at Google and said, can you guys build this system? It'll be impossible for these guys to find 87,000 humans that want to work at the IRS. If you're not contribution margin positive today, pre this bill in climate change, and the bill is the only way that you get there, you're DOA. You just don't know. Yeah. If you look at the ultra wealthy, I think I would be shocked if any of those folks were actually evading taxes at all, because it's impossible the way that this infrastructure runs. Like, you're getting K1s from Blackstone. What are you going to do? Are you going to change that? Like, totally. Do you guys even know the PIN number of your bank card? I have no idea. I don't think that if there is cheating of taxes, it's happening at that level. What's happening at that level are much more structural issues like carried interest, which they decided not to touch. No, I don't think this is my point. It's not mistakes. There's nobody with a pencil really filling out a K1 for Bill Gates, dummy. That's my point. They're going to find a lot of middle class and upper middle class folks, and they're going to have to focus on them because individually, it may not represent a lot, but when you multiply it by the number of people inside the United States, and this is what the Wall Street Journal and a bunch of other folks have been saying now, when you apply 87,000 people and task them incrementally with doing a job, it's not going to touch these folks that are already audited. It's going to touch the folks that are not audited. And by and large, a much, much larger majority of middle income and upper middle income people are not audited, which is why I think you could spend a lot less than $80 billion and just build software that guarantees only those that should be audited are, and uses machines to help figure out these leaks. There's this interesting thing that happens, which is that there's these drugs that are proprietary and under patent, okay? These could be chemical drugs or they could be biologics, okay? And eventually what happens is when they go generic, then folks will step in and make lower cost versions of those generics. Like, I'm on a statin. I think a couple of you guys are on a statin. Like, it's Lipitor, but it's not Lipitor, right? It's atorvastatin. It's like some generic drug that I just take, okay, as an example. There's a lot of folks that make that, and the cost of those pills basically go to zero. But there's a bunch of categories, particularly for biologic drugs, where it's very different. It's very difficult to make what's called a biosimilar. This is a generic drug. So long and short of it is there's all these classes of drugs that kind of like stand alone without enough competition. And I think there are two ways to solve this problem. One is where the government steps in, which I think is good, but the better way is already been happening in the United States. So, there's a nonprofit, which is a collective between a bunch of hospitals called Civica. And I think that's a really interesting example. And what those guys do was they said, we're just going to create our own generic drug manufacturer, and we're going to make the drugs we want. We're just going to make them super cheap. And, they're in the midst right now of completing a massive facility. I think it's in Virginia, where they'll be able to make as much insulin as is needed for the entirety of America for no more than $35 a dose. And by the way, when California said they're going to make their own, what they really meant was that they're going to go and RFP it out. And my hope is that they end up going with somebody like Civica, who has the experience of actually building it. Otherwise, California's just going to waste hundreds of millions of dollars.
Request for proposal, if you don't know what RFP is. Request for proposal.
Yeah. But there are these emerging nonprofits that are basically doing the work of the government. I think that's a better solution to what Sachs is actually...
competition, right? Yeah.
It kind of creates competition.